Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I am going to talk about the books that I read during the month of March. So during the month of March I read a total of 11 books. So 2 of those 11 books are technically volumes of superhero comics that I picked up, but I read them as single trade issues, but I'm just going to put them or talk about them as like a volume as opposed to like the individual issues. I'll talk about that in more detail when I get there. I want to start talking about stats more in my reading. I like hearing other people's stats when they read books, so I'll share some of mine with y'all. So I read a total of 3,911 pages. Of those 11 books, 8 were fantasy, 2 were of the superhero genre, which technically falls under fantasy sci-fi, but I'm going to count that as its own can of worms. I also read 1 mystery thriller. As far as audiences go, 7 of the 11 were YA, 2 of those 11 were adult, and 2 of those 11 I would categorize them as like general audiences, because superhero comics are child friendly, but I think DC and I would even say Marvel write their comics with the intention that they can be kid friendly, but they are meant for a larger audience to consume, so they're not like specifically like middle grade or YA or adult, though some exceptions can be made with certain comics. But the ones that I read, I would categorize them as like general audiences, like PG-13 type vibes. Let me know if there are any other stats that you would want to hear or other stats that you like hearing. So without much more talking, let me get started. 2 of the books that I read were part of a series. I started the Black Dagger Brotherhood series by J.R. Ward. The first 2 books are called Dark Lover and Lover Eternal. These are adult urban fantasies. They do have sexual content, so if you're uncomfortable with that, this is not the series for you. This is a vampire series. These vampires don't have the same lore as like your Bram Stoker's vampires. They have their own lore, they have their own world building, so if you're looking for something different but still vampire, you might be interested in this. I would say that these are paranormal fantasy romances. The first 2 books are very much like dark romances. Each book we follow a member of this Black Dagger Brotherhood, which are essentially these warrior vampires. These vampires are tasked with defending the vampire race from their like mortal enemies, and each book we followed an individual member and a love interest. So I'm assuming we'll go back to different characters throughout the series. I want to say that there's like 15, 16, 17 books in this series. It's pretty long standing and it's well known. I wouldn't say it's like underrated or overrated or anything like that. It's just a really popular urban fantasy series. It's not going to be for everyone because the vampires of this brotherhood are very like alpha male type, which I know is not everyone's cup of tea. It's not my favorite either, but I can like stomach it. It's not like, it's not going to ruin the book for me. It's not a hated trope. They're fine. They're really easy to binge, and I love binging these like urban fantasies. I listen to these on audio, which makes it like even more bingeable for me. They're very like cheesy and dramatic. These books were published in 2005, and a lot of the characters are incredibly like sexist, and it might be a huge turn off for readers, especially in the year of 2021. I don't love some of the comments and like some of the characters, but I still enjoy the stories overall. It kind of reminds me of like the Dresden Files, where Harry Dresden, the main character, is like also incredibly he objectifies a lot of the women. Same here. The men are kind of just infuriating sometimes, but it's something that I can take note of while still enjoying like the silly plot overall. It's also not something that I'm super dying to like continue, like once I finish one book let me like start the next. It's just like something to listen to while I pass the time, while I do chores or while I work on stuff for like my Bookstagram or whatever. Another series that I binged this month was the entire original Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. I have Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising. I have a lot of thoughts on this trilogy. I'm thinking that I want to do kind of like a chit chat, kind of get ready with me type video where I just talk about like all my thoughts, because I have a lot about this trilogy. But I will say for this wrap up, I do really enjoy it. Gosh, like reading these books kind of felt nostalgic for me, even though I have these aren't rereads. Like I read this for the first time this month, except for Shadow and Bone. I read that book maybe like 2 years ago, but even then I was already in my 20s when I first read Shadow and Bone, so there was no like nostalgic vibes for me the way that it has for other people. But like I still got that kind of like giddiness when I like first read Twilight, for example. I had very similar feelings, like excitement while reading these books. I know for a lot of people these books might be like hyped up, or they didn't age well, or you think they aren't as great as they once were, and that's a totally valid opinion. If there's one thing that I really disagree with as far as like the consensus is that a lot of people say that these read like younger YA. I'm gonna disagree there. I think that these books lie straight down the middle in terms of like the YA audience that this is intended for. It's not older YA. I don't think it's younger YA. I think it's like right down the middle. Not like a huge controversial take, but that's my opinion. I didn't love the ending, or it's not the ending that I would have wanted, but I still respect Leigh Bardugo's ending. I know it's not everyone's favorite, and because the ending is not what I wanted, it did kind of like emotionally affect me. After I read the last book, I probably cried for like 45 minutes, and then I like ate something, and like I still couldn't like deal with the emotion, so I took like a 3-hour nap. Yeah, the ending really affected me. What else can I say? I don't hate Mal. He's not my favorite character, but I don't hate him. I think a lot of people hate him, which there's a lot of reasons why to dislike him, especially because of Siege and Storm. The Darkling is a very interesting character, and as far as like shipping goes, because I think that's like a huge appeal of the series is a romance, I actually ship Alina with Nikolai. So yeah, I am already reading Six of Crows. This world that Leigh Bardugo has created is so fun and vibrant, and I want to read more from her in this universe. Early on this month, I read The Dire King by William Ritter. This is the 4th book in the Jacoby series, which is a YA paranormal fantasy series where we follow a young woman who has come from England because she really had no opportunities, or the opportunities that were given to her in England weren't her what she wanted. She wants to be an archaeologist. Her father doesn't want her to do that. He wants her to be like a proper like Victorian lady. So she like ditches England and goes to America for an opportunity, and she meets Jacoby. I forgot her character's name. I read the series. It feels so long ago, but it was just at the beginning of the month. But I think her name's Abigail. I just looked it up. Her name's Abigail, and she meets Jacoby pretty early on in the series, and Jacoby's kind of this private investigator who looks into cases that have a more like fantastical, supernatural, paranormal element, and that's essentially the synopsis of the overall series. I've read the 4th and final book, The Dire King, and I would have liked the series much more if it was more of like a monster of the week type series. There was a plot that we start seeing form in the 1st book, and it develops more and more into book 4. I particularly didn't really care for this whole 4-book arc. It was kind of boring. I wasn't interested in it. I personally prefer my like mystery, detective, fantastical, supernatural, paranormal stories to be more like individual, where there isn't like this whole plot that starts from book 1 ends book 4. I kind of like my own like individual stories, but that's like a personal thing. Maybe if you read the series you like the whole arc. I didn't. I do remember, I've already kind of forgot the majority of this last book. I do remember something happening towards the end that really bothered me. I was about to give this book 2 stars because of some things that happened, but right at the end the author kind of implied something in the epilogue, which I was like, okay, fine, I'll give it 3 stars. So I guess overall the series kind of underwhelmed me. Some parts were really fun and exciting. Again, the way the story played out was just like not something that I'm interested in. The next book has a very similar title to The Dire King, but this is called The Demon King by Cinda Williams Chima. I had read the first chapter of this book a long time ago in like a try a chapter type thing I was doing. The first chapter really doesn't do the whole book justice. After reading the first few chapters, I really got into it, but the first chapter is not really like a good indication of like how great the story is, at least with this book. Because I absolutely adored this book. There was a lot of political intrigue, which is like one of my favorite things in fantasy. We follow a few characters. We follow two main characters, but then we also have really good supportive secondary cast. The first character we follow is Ryza, who is the princess, the crown princess of her country. So she lives in a queendom, and the claim to the throne comes from mother to daughter. She's almost of age, so that means she has to like take a husband soon and eventually, you know, have a child, a daughter. She doesn't really want that. She thinks she's too young for that, even though her mother was also very young when she married. Ryza doesn't want that. So that's where a lot of this political intrigue comes up. We also follow a young man named Han, who is very poor, and he comes from like more village type community. At the beginning of the book, he steals this amulet from this young wizard, and amulets are really the sources of a lot of wizards' powers. So he steals it not really knowing what its purpose is or what its history, and that starts his whole story off. And like a lot of political intrigue stories, we don't really have a clear like plot explained, especially in the summary. It's more so like we see the plot develop as the story develops. One of my favorite things that I sometimes see in books, but it's very rare that I actually come across it, is when there is some already predetermined like myth or legend or like folktale that like everyone kind of believes, kind of like the whole King Richard III killed his nephews who were locked in a tower, and that's how he became king, because he had the next claim to the throne. That's something that a lot of people believe. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter. That's kind of like the consensus. In the story, we have this like myth of this demon king character who kidnapped a queen. She escaped and she basically defeated him or something, and that's pretty much what the general population believes. And throughout the story, we see this myth and this legend kind of become clearer and like clearer. That's by no means like the main plot of this story, but that is some aspect of the story that becomes important. I really love this like fixing revisionist history vibe that I sometimes see in fantasy books, but not as much. And I really enjoy seeing that here. I think if you enjoy the Fallen Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes, similar things, not a similar plot at all, but we have cast of characters, we have warring countries, we have very charismatic characters as well. So if you're interested in something similar with a similar vibe but not necessarily similar plot, this first book feels like that. I believe it's a trilogy, or there's 4 books in the series. I'm not 100% sure. The only thing that I could really critique is probably my copy didn't have a map. I'm not sure if other copies have maps, but geography and like other like kingdoms or realms or whatever are talked about a lot, and I didn't really have anything to reference. So I'm really bad at like geography if I don't have like something physical to look at. So every time they were like, oh yeah, the city or the country southeast of us, I was kind of just like lost, you know? So I also picked up the first book in the Serpents and Kings trilogy called The Queen of Cursed Things by S.M. Gaither. This is a book that's available on Kindle Unlimited. I really like taking chances on Kindle Unlimited fantasy series because I don't really have anything to lose. I already pay for the subscription. I can pick up however many books that I want. So I really don't go into a lot of these Kindle Unlimited series like knowing much really. But this series follows Elia, who is a member of the Serpent Clan. In this world we have I think 12 clans. 3 of those 12 clans are major clans that like rule over a country. So we have 3 major countries, 3 major clans. Elia was a member of the Serpent Clan, which has been pretty much wiped out because I believe they got a little more power hungry. They were experimenting with their magic and people were really uncomfortable with that, and so the majority of the Serpent Clan was wiped out. Elia is still alive and she keeps that identity to herself because there's still stigma against people from the Serpent Clan. The kingdom that she lives in is ruled by a very terrible king. The king is doing these terrible experiments on people, on his wife. He's not very well liked, and Elia is going to try to take down this king with the help of some friends and even the king's own son. In order to take down the king, she has to like take this power from this serpent goddess that her clan used to worship and use that to her advantage somehow. It's a decent start to a story. It's not fantastic. It's not terrible either. I do think that some parts of it might drag, especially at the beginning, but the ending left off on a bit of a cliffhanger and there are, you know, betrayals and stuff, so I'm looking forward to finishing this. I think this is going to be the ebook series that I focus on next month. I'll link my April TBR video down below where I talk about reading this series, hopefully in April. I try to focus on like an ebook series that I can read between like my physical books, so hopefully I get to these. I do have like kind of an ambitious TBR from April, but hopefully I can get to this. I do like trying to take advantage of my Kindle Unlimited subscription service. I also read Hunting November by Adriana Mather. This is the sequel and I'm assuming last book in this duology, the Killing November duology. We follow a young girl named November. She's your typical teenager who goes to high school, has a best friend, has crushes on guys, whatever. But one day she finds out that she is a member of this family who's been around for centuries. This family and a handful of other families have been behind major historical events for centuries, and I want to say it's implied like even like a millennia. She obviously didn't know that she comes from a long line of people who've had major influences on like historical events. However, one day something happens and her father has her delivered to the school where all the children of these secret society families leave their children so they can learn like essentially like sword fighting 101, knife throwing 101, whatever. Basically the school teaches children how to like kill and be like spies, I guess. The story in itself is kind of like far-fetched. You have to like suspend your disbelief and accept the fact that history has been essentially created by a handful of elite families. But if you can get past that whole plot point, then it's just like a fun spy mystery thriller. It reads on the younger side of YA, and I think I would have liked to have seen it if I would have liked to have seen the author make it a little more mature, maybe even like age up the characters for a more like new adult audience. I think that would have been fun, but it's still like okay. It's not fantastic. It was enjoyable, and that's like all I really asked for in a book, honestly. And the last two books that I want to talk about are the comics I read from the Supergirl Rebirth era. I read volume 3 of Supergirl Rebirth, and this one was called Girl of No Tomorrow. I'm pretty sure this volume comprises of issues 12, 13, 14, and Supergirl Annual number 1. Volume 4, which I believe was called Plain Sight, had issues 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. I read them as individual issues, but I know where the volumes start and stop. And I think both of these were written by Steve Orlando. So in volume 3 we have a villain who's been plotting against Supergirl for reasons. The story was kind of bland, really. A big part of this attack on Supergirl is to use like social media and like to use the public against her to kind of bring her down. I personally am kind of over the whole the public doesn't trust me angle that a lot of superheroes go through. It's not anything fresh anymore, so I'm kind of like over it personally. It's okay, it's not fantastic, it's not terrible, it can kind of just be boring at times. I believe in volume 3 issue number 14 Supergirl is having trouble like controlling her emotions, which leads to having trouble controlling her powers, which can be very dangerous because she is a Kryptonian. So she goes and gets help from the new Superman, which is a character who I believe was created in 2016 with this Rebirth line, who's essentially the Superman of China. I haven't read anything from him, so I don't know like how he's got his powers, but he's essentially like very similar to Superman. He's just the Superman of China, so she goes to him to get some help controlling herself, like finding her center and all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed it. I really like seeing superheroes interact with other superheroes who don't always get to. That was probably my favorite part of this volume. And then in volume 4, Plain Sight, we have the aftermath of what happened in volume 3, where in volume 4 no one really trusts Supergirl, at least within the city that she lives in. She lives in National City, and there's this huge like smear campaign against her. No one trusts her. Everyone thinks that she has like ulterior motives. Her reputation has gone down, so there is this government agency that's like hunting her down, so she can't help people. But if she can't help people, that means she can't show the public that she's there to help them if she can't help them, you know. And on top of that, Kara, when she's not Supergirl, she has an internship at this media outlet, this media corporation called Catco, which is ran by Cat Graham. She's an intern, and Cat Graham is like leading this smear campaign against Supergirl. Tons of articles, tons of like op-ed pieces on why Supergirl's a terrible person, which is like really conflicting and actually kind of sad that Kara is in some part ruining Supergirl's reputation just by being like an intern at this company. And like I mentioned in volume 3, I don't particularly care for the whole public turned against me plotline, so this was pretty average for me as well. However, the one standout issue in this volume was issue number 19, where we have a character come forward and write an opinion piece on Supergirl, and their name is Leigh, and they are non-binary. And Leigh talks about their backstory with Supergirl, where Supergirl saved Leigh's life and they became actually like good friends. Leigh doesn't know Supergirl's identity, but they're still friends, and Supergirl was the first person that Leigh like came out to as non-binary, and Supergirl basically became Leigh's like shoulder to like vent to express themselves, to talk about who they really are. And it was such like a really cute story about someone coming out to a superhero, and it was really nice to see a superhero help someone in a way that wasn't, you know, saving a plane from crashing or defeating a supervillain. Sometimes helping people can just be listening to them, and Supergirl is a really good friend to Leigh, and it was just a really sweet issue. I don't think you need to read anything beforehand if you just want to read the single trade issue number 19. It's super adorable and I loved it. If I was just rating this one individual like issue, I would give it 5 out of 5 stars. But the whole volume overall was kind of like boring and basic. So I think that's pretty much it, everything I read during the month of March. Feel free to talk about anything I talked about in the comments below. Have you read any of these? Are you interested in reading any of these? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I will link all my socials down below, as well as some much more important links. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe, or do neither. It's all cool with me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.